Hello and welcome to GuyLogic. My name is Temko and this is Unsolicited, the show where we take an opinion and give it to you whether you like it or not. This show is going to be all about No Man's Sky and the controversy surrounding its release and the issues its players have with the way it was handled for release. So we're talking about marketing, features that were promised, features that were not delivered or altered without informing the community, and other things like that, and why the community is having such a major backlash to the developers regarding this. Now, this is outside of the scope of this unsolicited episode, but obviously the game has some severe performance issues and PC issues unrelated to any missing or altered features that were never discussed or talked about. So even if all of these things were matched in the game, it still would be a disaster of a title based on its technical performance. And I want to showcase why people are saying they were deceived, they were lied to, and the marketing for this game and the hype for this game basically sold them lies. So I'm gonna split this up in a few segments based on the game's features. So we're talking about exploration, which ties into orbits, planets, variety of planets and stuff like that. Then we'll talk about trade and movement and stuff like aliens and communicating with aliens and alliances and social aspects. And then we're gonna talk about a few miscellaneous things, such as animals and creatures and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and dive into all of this one by one. If you have not seen our review for No Man's Sky, you can press the little white square in the corner and go on to that before you head back to this video, because this video will reference some of those things in it and also talk about some other stuff. Now, the information in this video was gotten through Reddit, mostly from the No Man's Sky subreddit. I'll link that in the description below so you can read up on it as well as a variety of other videos on YouTube and on other gaming websites, and sort of all cobbled together to get a best picture possible. So let's start with exploration and talk a little bit about that, what people thought they were promised and what people actually got. So exploration wise, they were promised heavenly body movement. So this means that planets move around the sun and they move around their own axis, and then moons move around the planet, and all of this would have actual game effects. Orbits of the planets around the sun would result in a day-night cycle coupled with the orbital movement, would result in temperature shifts of the planet. And obviously, moons orbiting the planet would result in either things like tides and stuff like that. All of this was talked about vaguely by the developer in several videos and several interviews, but the end result of that is that we got none of those things. Planets don't actually move, they are stationary, and the day-night cycle isn't tied to any planetary movement on its rotational axis. Also, moons, as they are currently in the game, are also stationary and do not move around the planet, and there is no actual sun in any solar system or any other star. This is a backdrop with a color, and the planets don't actually move around it. The same goes for space stations. They don't actually move or otherwise interact with any other objects. So this is definitely not in the game in any way, shape, or form, as was originally discussed. The second part of planets was that there's a very limited variety of planets. If we take a look at our own solar system, and we, for example, take a look at Mercury, which is a dry, not atmospheric planet with major shifts in temperature. Then we get to Venus, which is a humid planet with a toxic atmosphere and very high temperature shifts. Then we get to Earth, which is a lush, vibrant planet with life. Then we get to Mars, which is a dry planet with lots of dust storms, but no vegetation or life. Then we get to the gas giants and ring worlds. And then we get to ice planets, such as Pluto. Rest in peace, Pluto as a planet. All of this variety in our own solar system is never represented in the game in any form, in any galaxy, or any star system at all. All planets are rocky planets with a variety of life. You will have water on most planets, you'll have life on most planets, and though the vegetation and type of resources that are easily accessible does vary, there is nowhere near the variety that was originally discussed in the game. And if we take a look at where these answers came from, these came from Sean Murray directly, answering community questions by the Game Informer show. So these are questions and answers directly from the community to Sean Murray and his answers. Also, there are things like desert planets and stuff like that don't really exist. So something like Tatooine from Star Wars doesn't exist, and these were actually shown in gameplay footage and trailers up until a few months ago. So these were apparently cut. For what reason, I couldn't tell you. There's also a couple of other things, such as rivers, large structures, and other objects that were injected in the world. There's no rivers in the game at all. All the body of water is either lakes or oceans. Very large structures that are currently in the game are very tiny compared to some of the others in the game, and you have to think, for example, massive constructed things such as mountain peaks or volcanoes and even creatures on a massive size. Some of these were even shown in the E3 2014 trailer. None of those are in the game. Now, there are crashed ships on planets you can explore and upgrade, but there's no such thing as crashed freighters, which is something that was definitely shown. And the last part here is structures with moving parts. These again were shown during both the IGN first gameplay as well as the Portal gameplay trailer from No Man's Sky, both official sources sanctioned by the developer. Both had showing movements on space stations and showing movements on a different ship. These things do not exist in the game. No vessel or no building has any moving parts on the outside. And portal-wise, the portals have been found, but nobody knows what they do, and they are not active. So this may be something for a future DLC, but currently not available. That pretty much covers the way world building and what we actually got from what was promised. And this is a major thing, because what was actually in the game currently is rocky worlds with a backdrop of a star system, as opposed to a actual physics-based calculation on orb movement and heavenly body movement and tides and day-night cycles active with interactivity to creatures and the biosphere. None of that is in at all, and the variety of planets and the variety of objects to explore in the galaxy is extremely stripped down to what it is currently. Why this was stripped, nobody knows. Hello Games has been very silent on that issue. Also, something that is not in at all is creatures affecting the landscape. So you can think about large herbivores grazing grass and eating away the grass, or causing destruction by knocking over trees if they're large dinosaur-like creatures like the E3 trailer showed. None of that is in. Creatures do not interact with the environment at all outside of you being able to feed them and then they pointing you to something that magically spawns in their vicinity. So that is something that is definitely missing, which is again a shame. Now, talking about interactive AI elements like creatures, we have the Sentinels. Sentinels are sort of the big bads. They patrol worlds and they will attack you if you keep mining and doing stuff like that. In the game, currently Sentinels only arrive in 1, 2, or 3. I have not found Sentinels arriving in more than 4 in any situations. So Sentinels roaming in large packs is not in the game at all, which is something that apparently is global for the entire game, because orbital fleets that teleport in with more than a couple of units are also not in the game in any way, shape, or form. The same goes for trade ships, trade vessels, and other interactive elements you might come across in the game. As soon as these cross the threshold of 2 of 3, none of them appear anymore. There aren't any large fleets, neither for Sentinels nor for spaceships. This was something that was both shown in the game during gameplay trailers, showing during the PlayStation Experience 2015 with Sean Murray. What we have in the game are walking Sentinels, and those are available, but what was shown was that Sentinels would walk around in the environment and awaken in front of the player when activated. This is something not shown. They just spawn around when they are summoned by the other Sentinels. Again, a major letdown, and this is something that is an issue with the game, because the combat mechanics are already very simplified. Things like pirates only come in packs of 2 or 3, things like arriving space vessels only come in packs of 3, arriving Sentinels that combat you only arrive in 1, 2, or 3. Nothing ever overwhelms you, nothing showcases that there is a massive galactic civilization and not little tribes of 2 or 3 people just roaming around in a seemingly bland universe. So moving from there, we talk about space vessels and ship class differentiation and stuff like that. Again, there is a lot of information out there, but there's no actual full quote. And this is something that a lot of people are blaming Sean Murray and the Hello Team for being very vague. Initially, discussions were had in a variety of situations, such as the E3 trailer and the IGN first look and stuff like that, where players would have the ability to have different classes of ships that are faster, that can go further with the same fuel, ships that are larger in cargo capacity, different class specifications and differentiations. Currently in the game, all ships are identical except for the way they look on the outside and the amount of inventory slots they have. There is no classifications. There is no ship that can't have double multi-powerful cannons. Every ship can do that based on your inventory slots. So this is something that was stripped down to the core of the experience. Instead of having a diverse, rich space vessel faring environment, you have a vessel that's only difference is getting better inventory slots. What was shown in the No Man's Sky E3 trailer of 2014, again, this is the original reveal trailer, was very clean, dynamic flight of your space vessel on a planet and going into orbit. That is something that is not in the game. The controls in the game are very subpar for flight, so not sure if that was a doctored shot. It probably was, as opposed to the actual release version, which had people flying it. And that seems to be a problem with everything in the game being the very basic of features and only having running around as the actual in-depth experience. Okay, so let's wrap this all up together, because there's a bunch of other stuff that people are speaking about, from the way fog works, from the way beacons work, from the way reinforced doors could be hacked according to developer, radio chatter from inside your starship to different starships, stuff like that. None of that is in. So let's wrap up and say what is in, what isn't in, and why the issues are the way they are. Here on Unsolicited, we take the approach of trying to find what the reason was for cutting some of these features and what the reasons might be, good or bad, why players were not informed. And honestly, in the situation of No Man's Sky, I think it's a two-part deal, where part of it was that the developers had way more on their hands in terms of workload and in terms of needing to work things out than they initially anticipated. And it's either pride, ego, or the inability to deal with that based on the developers' inexperience that they never informed their customer base of this. Also, obviously, the fever pitch of a hype on this game, mostly being around mystery, mostly being around not telling players what was going on, led to a fever pitch of people trying to get more out of the game than the developer ever promised. What I'm talking about are all things that the developer or different outlets with the blessings of the developer have spoken about. These are all things that were not refuted and only players that went in after the release figured out. So that is a major mess up from the developer from every direction. But let's talk about what happened, why it could have happened, and why the backlash is pretty much justified. So developers' issue was that they had a massive universe with a massive scale and a massive scope and a massive depth to it, but they didn't have the time or money to make those features happen. Remember, the Sony interaction for this game and the Sony partnership for this game was only for the publishing side on the PlayStation and some marketing gimmicks. They did not fund the development of the game in any way, shape, or form, to the best of my knowledge. So you'd have the developer promising, saying you'll have orbital mechanics, and when the time came to actually develop those orbital mechanics based on real-world physics, their team would go and say, well, we have 15 people working on this, we have about 5 years worth of work lying on the table, what can we cut that is not going to impact the experience that much, even though we promised it? And obviously, one of the first things that will go is orbital mechanics, because they're a gimmick that doesn't add much, and nobody really mourns them outside of the fact that people wanted them because they were promised those. Another thing you might imagine is saying, well, we're gonna remove the day-night cycle being tied into rotational axis, because that's more calculation, more work, and adding it in the procedural generation, again, useless. We redistribute resources on planets based on their distance from the sun. If you remove the sun, you can't do that. You don't have a center point for your solar system. Scrapped as well. Random redistribution on every planet. These are all logical steps in trying to reduce the scope of a project, any software project. I do this in my line of work. Every other game developer does this in their line of work, and basically every software ever built does this. You scope a project, and if you run into time constraints or you run into different issues, maybe technical or from a legal standpoint, you try to rescope the project, keeping its core functionality intact while cutting superfluous functionality that you might not need as desperate. But the issues here are not that they started cutting functionality that was fluff on top of the rich and diverse world. They started cutting functionality that cut into massive core gameplay experiences. The different classifications of ships being cut is a massive impact for various playstyles, and people are understandably quite upset about this. The cutting of different planetary types is a massive impact for players that enjoy exploration and finding out different planets. Just riding around on a planet with a ring system and blowing up asteroids, flying around different gas giants, or flying around ice planets and seeing if you can survive on them in extreme cold, maybe to get some rare material, would be a very interesting feature, but that isn't in the game at all. Also, obviously, the massive stripping down of the trade and interaction and alliance system with aliens is, again, a very impactful part of the core experience, because it's not now of having a living civilization where you align yourself with one of many alien species and their goals and ideals. You just do and talk to all of them as they are static aliens and nothing more than money or item dispensaries. Again, massive stripping down of gameplay features, resulting not the depth of a galaxy, but the size of a galaxy with the depth of a waddling. So No Man's Sky tried to promise the universe, and while they delivered something the size of the universe, it also only had the depth of a blank carbon sheet of paper where they squiggled some lines saying universe. Now, the developer is under massive fire for all of these things, and some of these things aren't actually the fault of the developer. Things like multiplayer in the game were never promised in the way the people imagined it. They were talking about PvP, they were talking about PvP communities, they were talking about flying with other players in a region. While the developer hinted at this, they always said No Man's Sky was not a multiplayer experience primarily. There were some multiplayer components, but not multiplayer in and of itself. And that's something I can't fault the developers for. But again, in the massive scope of the universe, they promised quite a few things they never delivered on. So even if we remove this one little element from the equation, the developers still massively fucked up on both communication to their customers and informing their customers of the feature set of their game, instead of trying to cloak it behind closed doors and behind mystery and behind vague statements. So people have a backlash on this, understandably. Very fair backlash, saying this is not the game you're promised and refunding it. And if you can, you should, because you were not promised the game. And I do expect there to be a legal tail to this action based on various watchdogs going after him, saying you promised A, B, and C, but you only delivered A and B. Where's C and D? People paid for this, they deserve their money back. I do fully expect this. Now, I'm not first in legal law or anything like that, so that's not gospel, but this is something we've seen with different games and different projects as well, based on their marketing experience. Now, having said all of this, so bringing all of this together, we have a game that promised the universe and didn't deliver. Now, people are upset at the developer for 1, not delivering it, 2, not talking about it, and 3, pretending those features are in just fine and not responding to critique. All of this together really feels to me like the developer didn't have enough time, didn't have enough money, and didn't have enough skill or experience in their team to properly scope their project and set reasonable expectations from their community. They could have stepped in months ago talking about planetary rotation and said, you know guys, we talked about this feature, but we've decided to cut this feature because it would take a lot of development time and not add a lot of gameplay features, so sorry about that. We misspoke initially. We were a bit excited. This feature's not in. They could have gone and said, you know guys, I know we mentioned something about multiplayer, but we've decided not to add this feature because we feel it doesn't add to the core experience and would take away time from other features, such as sand planets. They could have done all of this. Instead, they kept silent, fueled the hype, and in the end, are getting burned for it. Deservedly so. So in my opinion, and this is unsolicited, so this is our opinion here on GuyLogic, is that No Man's Sky tried to deliver the world, tried to give a promise for something they could never deliver, then promptly shut up, took your money, and ran away with it, delivering the barest of experiences possible. Is what they delivered an enjoyable experience? Yeah, probably to some players once they fix the issues, but it is not the experience they promised before release. As such, I fully think that the hate and criticism on the Hello Games development studio for their marketing, for the way the PC release was, for the shoddy performance, for the cut features without any word, and for the variety of things in the game that just don't seem to work the way they should in any reasonable fashion, not being communicated upfront and honestly to players, and on top of that, selling the game at a premium price of $60 does not help but rub salt into their wounds of players that were trying to support this game and very excited for a survival sandbox experience in a procedure-generated sci-fi universe. Now again, as I said, all of this information comes from various interviews, various gameplay previews, as well as massive accumulation in various Reddit threads on the No Man's Sky subreddit. I've linked some of those down below, and I'll link some of the sources I've used here as well in the description, so you can check those out for yourselves. But as I said, this is a tip of the iceberg of a variety of features that the game promised that are either not in the game, are not in the game in the way they were shown or promised, or if they are in the game, either buggy or very stripped down for what was originally either shown, promised, or talked about, not by third parties, but by the developer and by sanctioned previews by companies such as IGN and others like them to showcase the game's feature set. So thank you for watching. If you liked this video, press that like button below. If you didn't like this video, well, there's a dislike button for exactly that, and leave a comment. Tell us what you think about this very special unsolicited episode. Tell us what your thoughts are. What are your opinions on No Man's Sky and the issues the game has? And if you want to see more content like this or our different continuous review content, just press that subscribe button down below and we will deliver. So until then, I wish you a good day, and until next time, right here on GuyLogic.